Hello, everybody. I have with me today Chris McDougall, which I'm really excited about. He is the best-selling author of the Born to Run series, and Born to Run was published in 2009, and it was a huge success, and it brought the idea of natural footwear and natural running form to the public consciousness. So in many ways, it sparked a lot of the things that I'm doing today regarding shoes and natural foot health. So thanks so much for being with me today, Chris.
You reminded me of something that I think about a lot, which is that people would say to me, like, what happened with Born to Run? Like, why did it take off? And my theory has always been that there were a lot of people out there in the world who were all approaching the same truth from different directions. And none of them had like a village square. Like, there wasn't a common meeting spot. And
Mhm.
I think that's what Born to Run provided. It was kind of like, I think there was this almost like worldwide shock of recognition of people going, exactly what I was thinking. And I think that's the reason why it struck a nerve.
Yeah, I've had the same experience with my blog and my business that it just was a good timing because people were struggling finding shoes. They were struggling with their feet. They're having these issues. And then it's like, okay, now there's a place that people can go to find the answers that lots of people are having. So that's
Which
great.
is funny. It's funny how we live in a world of nanosecond communication, and yet there's so much that we just don't even know that isn't available. Like, I had a perception of you and what you were doing, and then you mentioned hypermobility. I was like, what? What? Like, I had no clue, because a good friend of ours, Christina, is that's her specialty, and her journey is so similar to yours. And if I'd known, I would have been talking about you and Christina forever, because but there she is off there struggling in isolation, looking for answers by herself. So are you, and you're struggling to solve the same problem. And yet, if you only knew about each other, you would have had so much solidarity.
Oh yeah, but that's the some of the beauty of putting the work in and doing this stuff on your own, and then you have this magical moment where you find other people and there's this community in this space that's so great, where you've all been sort of working on your own for years and then you come together and it's just really fun to have those moments.
And yet, that's you're a glass half full kind of person. I'm the glass half empty, which is like, why didn't anybody tell me? Which is my reaction with Born to Run, because so for my background was I was a hard news reporter for the Associated Press, doing as a foreign correspondent working overseas, and then I came into magazine journalism, but I came into it with the investigative journalist hard news mentality, where you test everything, corroborate everything. If your mother tells you that she loves you, get a second opinion, kind of thing. And yet, as I'm working for magazines, one of them in particular was Runner's World. And I was a consulting editor with Runner's World and did about 4 or 5 stories a year for them. And I just took it as a given that the whole thing about running shoes was, scientific evidence. It was proven, and you move beyond. So I never tested anything, because they always had these like rankings, and they brought in these teams of you know physical scientists and podiatrists, and they shrouded everything they said about running shoes in this mystique of science. And they had the Runner's World Testing Laboratory. That's literally what they called it, the shoe testing laboratory. And so I moved beyond that into whatever story I was working on. So when I started working on Born to Run, and I started meeting guys like, oh, this is bizarre. At that moment, that little bing you heard, that was Luis Escobar, the guy who took the cover photo for Born to Run. He just pinged me this second. Anya, you got some astral thing going on. It's weird. You're summoning people from my past. Anyway, the first Barefoot people I met were like Barefoot Ted. And I'm like, I'm not going to listen to this guy. So the Barefoot guys, to me, struck me as these essentially weirdos. But over time, it finally got through my head that they really knew what they were talking about. And the science I was hearing from the magazines was just rhetoric and jargon. It didn't have anything behind it. And to me, that was a profoundly shattering moment, or shaky moment. Sorry for all these that's not my daughter testing it. It was a shocking moment, because it made me think, hey, listen, if I was wrong about this, like what else am I wrong about?
Mhm. That's one of my favorite stories about what happened before Born to Run is you going through that process of sort of, I don't know if it's like your shelf breaking or like, some of these ideas that you had, the mental shift, and you meeting up with Irene Davis, who now does so much important research and so much important work for establishing the scientific foundation of this whole concept. But at the time, she was prescribing orthotics for everything. She was very much doing the traditional way and not questioning. And you went in and met her, and I'll let you tell the story because it's not in your book. So tell us about when you first met up with Irene Davis.
It's I can reflect for a long time on her character and her personality because um, she is so special in the sense of like you meet Irene, she's the boss. You walk into her lab, she is in charge. Very smart, super experienced, very creative, very, very professional. So it's the kind of person that some ding dong freelance runner's world reporter is not going to throw her off her stride. So the reason I came to see her was because I had done some early, I can't remember exactly what story I was working on. Basically, what happened was this is bizarre. This happens. So all those texts that are coming in are from Luis Escobar, who's down in the Copper Canyon right now for the annual Caballo Blanco race. So as we were talking about this, it's actually unfolding bizarre. Um, so what happened was I had one question for Irene Davis, which was that, Lewis, stop it, which was if running shoes and orthotics and motion control are so important, Nike had just released a shoe called the Nike Free, which is about barefoot movement. And the mythology behind it was a couple of Nike sales reps were visiting the Stanford track team, and the legendary coach Vin Lanana had a bunch of his athletes running laps barefoot. And so the Nike coach is like, Vin, what's going on? We give you all the shoes you want. Why are these kids running barefoot? And Vin's statement, which I can almost quote verbatim, was, I don't know why, but it seems like when the kids train barefoot, they get injured less and progress faster. So these reps take this back to Beaverton and go to the Nike lab and go, do you know guys know what Vin's doing? And they're like, oh yeah, we've known this forever, that foot strength is where it's at. And they released the Nike Free. So that was my question to Irene Davis. At the time, she was head of whatever was exercise physiology at the University of Delaware. I happen to live 45 minutes from U Delaware. She had a pedigree from Penn State, which back in the 70s and 80s was the preeminent testing laboratory in the world for running shoe development in the dawn of the running shoe era. So I go to Irene Davis and I said, how's this work? You guys are all saying that we need stability, motion control, arch support, but now Nike is providing a shoe which has none of that. How do these two things coexist in the same universe? And I remember the look on her face where she just was silent and looked at me for a long time. She goes, that's a very good question. I'm like, oh, I'm glad, because I felt like a half an idiot. And that began our conversation that went on for years. And Irene just went back and started to test things. And I just am so moved by her graciousness of expertise, because when you have a lot invested in what you know and that is shaken, not many people are going to go back and go, let me blow up everything I spent 30 years perfecting and teaching and challenge it.
Yeah. And the truth is the most impactful people in this space are the ones who go where the evidence takes them. They go where their experience takes them, and they don't allow themselves to be entrenched in these ideals or this dogma. And that is really what it's all about. And sometimes there can be a bit of the same type of a mentality on the opposites. It's like whatever side you're on, you're just like stuck in it. But this ability to change your mind and to explore and try new things, it's so valuable. And it really is, to her credit. She's a really amazing person.
Yeah. But here's the thing about it, though, Anya, this is the vexing thing. go where the evidence takes you. Now, in the years since Born to Run came out, I have seen this avalanche of studies all arguing contradictory things. And
Mm,
even experts themselves, there is a evolutionary biologist who was at the forefront of this. I wrote about him in Born to Run, and I remember being on a conference call. I believe it was with that Healthy Foot Alliance or a group like that. And this is a guy that I know who runs barefoot himself, who 100% believes in it.
Dan
And
Lieberman.
yet, yeah, I was going to sort of leave him on name, but sure, that's fine. Dan
Okay.
Lieberman. But what the hell, his cover is blown. But I remember this call with a bunch of different sort of scientists and advocates, and Dan just waffling, like, oh, we can't say this and we can't prove that. I'm like, Dan, you made a choice. Fucking say it. But the idea is that there's so much ass covering among scientists. So even those who believe refuse to say.
Mm,
Other people who are invested can always find some kind of study that challenges it. And I see it all the time. To me, if I were coming into this conversation from the outside, um, I would have no idea what to think.
mhm. Yeah, and I mean, because I have come from this as a layperson, I was going through my own foot issues and I was searching for my own answers. At some point, these studies become irrelevant, because they might apply to 60% of the population, but what about the other 40%? Or it's this, very specific condition they're targeting or the super specific muscle. And when you're in pain or you're just wanting to be able to have a functioning body, at some point, it doesn't really matter to you. You just want to figure out what works for you. And you see clinicians doing the same, having the same kind of approach, is they use the research to inform, but ultimately they have to do what works for the patient. So then they have all this anecdotal experience and all this anecdotal evidence that can sometimes be more valuable than that one study that isolated this, specific tendon and, all those like really minute things that are happening that take so long to build up to anything really tangible in the research world. Clinicians are out there and they're practicing this, or individual people are out there and they're experimenting and they're figuring out some of these things faster because they're getting the results in their own body. And I think that is where I see so much activity over the last few years, is this more the grassroots kind of people are just tired of waiting around for the answer, because it's just never going to happen. There's never going to be like the definitive conclusion about here is the best way to run and these are the best shoes. That's just not going to happen with a clean period on the end. But people are out there, they're figuring it out and taking advantage of the resources. But it is confusing. Go ahead.
But that is honestly, that is the frustrating thing, is that we live in a world of so much information, and yet what's our starting point? It's primitive. It's medieval. Go out there and figure it out for yourself. I was funny. I saw a little clip. Peter Attia, the longevity and healthy living expert. He pointed out that in a normal practice, a doctor is seeing a patient every 12 minutes. So, you know, if you walk in and you're having a hip issue, are you going to sit someone down and explain how foot mobility and foot strengthening works and answer all their questions about shoes and then tell them, hey, go home and walk around barefoot? That conversation alone is an hour, because you're going to get resistance. I hear it all the time. Like, I'm sure you do too. Like, how many times are you going to answer the same question? I go, what if I step on a hypodermic needle if I walk around barefoot? But my doctor says.
Mhm.
And you just want to get them back to ground zero, which is strength better than weakness? Is
Mhm.
function better than immobility? The simple logical questions, use that as your starting point. But again, it's hard to get there if you're speaking to a conventional physician.
And the mentality of the foot is like other parts of the body in that they can be rehabilitated. Like if you throw out your shoulder or you sprain your wrist, you rest it for a little while, then you take it through a training program and you do things with it so that it gets back up to speed. You can do the same thing with your feet. But yeah, it is, I'm hoping that at least that part of it even if the shoe are still Wild West and it's a lot of conflicting information, at least okay, the feet can be rehabilitated, and let's consider like how foot strength can help, and then let people decide about the shoes later. I am starting to see more of that be part of the conversation when it comes to physical therapy or overall health and wellness, is the feet are just part of the body, and they weren't really thought of in that way 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, isn't that peculiar? Isn't that peculiar? Again, this was sort of take me back through my own experience, which was it was simultaneously such a revelation and yet so mortifying that I'd never thought of it. When I have a guy like Barefoot Ted, who at the time was probably wearing like lifeguard shorts and no shirt and a shaman necklace and some wacky crap on his head. This is my expert, and he's telling me that everything about running health begins because what is your contact with planet Earth? It is your feet. They didn't evolve by accident. There wasn't like a bunch of random parts chucked into the body. No, they evolved for millions of years for extraordinary function. And again, to hear this from Ted, he actually had like a monkey necklace around his neck. I remember as he's talking, I'm looking at this monkey necklace. I'm getting lectured on science by a guy with a monkey necklace. But in the end, he was completely right. But the reason he was right is because he has a voracious mind and is absolutely unself-conscious about trying anything anywhere to see if it works.
Yeah, it's a good way to live life. So
Yeah, right.
tell us a little bit about Born to Run 2, which came out about almost a year and a half ago, end of
Yeah,
2022. And
yeah,
that was answering a lot of the questions that still lingered after Born to Run, like practically, how do I go about running and how do I go about training my body? So how important is that to the whole picture, the form and the exercises and that sort of thing?
yeah. It's funny. I look back and I wonder whether I should have written Born to Run 2 sooner, but then I land on the answer that I couldn't have because I was an outsider to this world and was trying to feel my way through the darkness, and I wasn't quite sure if I was heading the right direction. So at the time I wrote Born to Run, I was a magazine journalist, freelance magazine journalist. I had heard about this tribe in Mexico. I went down, wrote an article for Runner's World about them, and um, I was just trying to understand how is it that we're told that running's bad for the body and your knees are going to break down and you need these special shoes and all the impact is bad for you. That's what we're told. But yet, here's a tribe of people who are running into their 80s in the most minimal shoes imaginable. And they're running mega marathons, ultra marathons, multiple times. And so that was the original article. And it's kind of like well, we're not quite sure the answers, but this guy named Mike Katruca Blanco seems to have adopted some of this for himself. And at the time, I was an injured ex-runner. I tried to do some running. I was like about 250 pounds. Doctor said, dude, you are like the size of Shrek. A body like yours should be moving at a walk, if at all, not running through mountains. And I took that as truth. But then I met Eric Wharton, who was an endurance coach. And he goes, that's all baloney. You can duplicate exactly what the Tautomat are doing by changing your running form. And this, at the time, was such a revolutionary thought. Change your running form because you were always told, absolutely, don't mess with your natural stride. I mean, I'm sure you can find running magazines and articles to this day.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own natural stride.
Preferred movement.
Don't try to mess with it. What's that?
It's the preferred movement pattern. Yeah.
Preferred movement pattern. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you go to your running. It's been so long since I've bought into that nonsense that I almost kind of forgot about what it is. Yeah, go to your running specialty store. And a few years ago, it was gait analysis. Now it's preferred movement patterns. You run on this treadmill for a couple of minutes, and some ex-college track runner is going to diagnose you as being, uh, overpronating or underpronating or what is supplementing or whatever the heck it is, whatever this jargon nonsense, supinating, whatever this nonsense is, and then they'll put you in a shoe. So the problem is you're moving, however you move is how you move, and we will compensate it for it with some kind of a shoe.
Mhm.
And so now I'm meeting Eric Horton. He goes, "Oh, you got to change your form." Now, again, as a writer for Runner's World, I read Runner's World every month and over again. Don't change your form. Don't change your form. Don't change your form. And I go, well, how do you do that? And he showed me. He goes, step one, take off your shoes. Again, this is like the second like heresy. What do you mean? You can change your form? I run without my shoes, but I'll get hurt. He's like, no, the shoes are causing the problem. So again, I think it's been now whatever 13 years since Born to Run. I feel that maybe these conversations have taken place a lot. But for me at the time, if he had said, "Oh yeah, first take off all your clothes," it would have had the same reaction. Like, what? Yeah. We're in a public park in Denver. First, take off all your clothes, and then you're gonna run on all fours. If he had said that, I would have had the same reaction. And I'm like, all right. So take off my shoes, and he goes, run right next to me, and he showed me how to land on my forefoot, how to drive with my knee, how to change and lower my gait. Again, as a big guy, I was always told, reach out,
Mhm.
long stride, use those long legs. Like, no, dude, super short, pitter patter, pitter patter, pitter patter. It all seemed very, very wrong. And yet, at the end of an hour of doing these exercises, I felt great. It
Mhm.
made perfect sense. And that began the journey. And I think the thing about it was so still so fresh in my mind. I'm like, all right, this is a band-aid. It's good for now. It'll get me through this race that I want to do with the Thermomata. But it's not going to stick. And Eric goes, if you learn good running form, you can run as far as you want, whenever you want for the rest of your life. Again, it's one of those things that stuck in my head because I'm like, no way. He's saying it, I'm doing it, but part of my mind's like, this has a expiration date on it. And that was it. So, but what happened then was, so I run the race. I write Born to Run. This insane explosion of attention breaks out. I'm doing book tours and running events all over the world for like 2 years. It was kind of relentless. I plunged right into my next book, Natural Born Heroes, in the midst of all this Born to Run, you know, um, turmoil that was going on. So my brain was like super stretched. We have a small farm in Pennsylvania with 20 some sheep and goats and donkeys, two little girls. My brain was all over the place. And I finished that book, and then we started working on Running with Sherman. And it just suddenly dawned on me that, wow, you know what? Like 10 years have gone by, and exactly what Eric told me has come true without me even being aware of it. I walk out the door for a run. I use it as an escape from whatever I'm doing. If I'm working, answering emails, or writing, I want to get out the door and just have some fun. So I'm looking around like, okay, you know what? That trail looks good. Off I go. And if I'm feeling good, I'll go for 2 hours. If I'm feeling crappy, I'll go for half an hour and walk home, just take it easy. Some days I'll go for a 3 hour run. I don't plan it. I don't even think about it. It is just whatever I feel like, but I feel like I have the capability to do
Mhm.
whatever I want. But at the
Freedom.
same time, complete freedom, complete physical and mental freedom. No anxiety, no worry about getting hurt, none of it. That even crossed my mind. But at the same time, I would get hundreds of messages a week, sometimes a day, from people going, I just heard we're born to run. Like, tell me what to do. Can you tell me how to this? And my doctor says this. What should I do? And I have plantar fasciitis. And I would just never answer them because I'm like, I'm not that guy. I'm not a coach. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trainer. I'm a journalist who writes about those people. I'm
Mhm.
not those people. But then, after a while, two things dawned on me. Number one, I was the space monkey that was up in the capsule to see whether or not the capsule would work. And I came back to Earth. Hey, I'm still alive. The monkey's alive. So I was proving with my own body that what Eric told me is accurate. And number two, I had also incorporated enough of what he had told me specifically that there was actually a program that we could share with other people.
Yeah. So have you had any injuries over the last 15 years?
So this is a really interesting question that I usually get foamy mouthed about and zealous about, or whatever you call it, evangelical about, because injuries, we have such a fear of injury. Oh, I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get hurt. I'm like, dude, you're not hurt. Yeah, your foot hurts. You're not injured. You don't need a cast. And so, have I had aches and pains and setbacks? Of course, all the time. And my typical one is usually right before any event, if it's a race or if I'm meeting up with Eric for like a running camp or whatever, I will always quadruple my training in like 2 weeks. I'll go up from like 5 miles a day to like 15 miles a day, and then I always get a calf strain. And it's as predictable as Christmas, I will get a calf strain right before I'm supposed to do something. We just did a running camp, a border running camp in Bisbee, Arizona, back in January. And I've been body surfing a ton in Hawaii. I've been in the water nonstop, barely been running. So like 2 weeks before the camp, I just start running straight vertical trails up and down every day. And that's why I blow out my calf. So I show up at the camp, I'm like, hey, Eric, I blew out my calf. He's kind of like, yeah, surprise. Tell me something I didn't expect. But it didn't matter. So we did the entire camp and we ran trails in Arizona, me with my aching calf. So, was I injured? I don't think so. My calf hurt, but it didn't stop me from running. It was uncomfortable. So the question of, have I been injured? I would say no, I've not been injured. Have I had all kinds of aches and pains and cramps and tears? Sure. But I think, unfortunately, maybe, I'm not sure what the cause, but I feel like we lived in such a coddled, cocooned way of life that any nagging body feedback, we back off. Whoa, what's this? And then doctors tell you, well, rest it. You've got to rest it. So I don't think I've been injured. And to me, and this is, Eric backs us up all the time, he sprained his ankle like a maniac when we were doing the photo shoot for Born to Run 2. We were up in the mountains of Colton, California. And he came off of a rock and twisted his ankle. Puffs up black and blue. It didn't slow him down. Not because he's super tough, but he believes that with an ankle sprain, you need to continue circulation and mobility, that you need to flush out the torn tissue of clotted blood. And he just ran through it. And 3 days later, his ankle was fine.
I had a conversation with a biomechanist, Katie Bowman, recently, and we talked a little bit about this same idea of how pain and whether there's actually a tissue injury or if it's just inflammation, both are feedback, which sometimes it's like, okay, maybe I progressed too fast. Maybe I need to stop doing this one thing, but also I need to figure out what happened. What am I doing that, was it just, oh, I stepped off the rock wrong, which is unavoidable? Or is it a form issue? Was it a ramping up too quickly and my tissues couldn't adapt fast enough? It's a message and there's something that can be learned from it. But that if you just stop completely, then like Eric said, you're cutting off blood flow, you're cutting off lymphatic drainage, you're getting tissue wasting and muscle atrophy. And so figuring out how to navigate that is challenging because, we're hardwired to avoid pain, right? So navigating that is, I think, a challenge for a lot of people because they are afraid of getting injured and then being out for 6 months or a year. There's that and tendency to want to overreact to oh crap, I've done it now kind of a thing. But oftentimes it's not that. It's just, okay, I'm getting feedback. What am I going to do in response to the feedback that my body's giving me? How can I keep going? Go ahead.
I was just thinking that if back in 2004, if you were the first person I spoke to about this instead of Barefoot's head, I would have believed it a lot sooner. You seem unbelievably rational and well thought out, and you have complete mastery of exactly what you want to say. Where he was explosive maniac, listen to you, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Back then,
I'm doubting.
Back then, I was orthotics. I was wearing orthotics in 2004.
So we could just time travel what you know today back to where he was then. So there's a lot of it. And that's why Eric has no patience with doctors because the terminology is so outdated. Pain, injury, even pain. Pain is feedback.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's, as you mentioned, it is such a simple logical equation. So what happens with me is if I haven't been running for a while and I try to ramp up, I am starting off with great form, but I don't have the muscular stamina that I had previously. So
Yeah.
what happens is that form begins to degenerate
Hmm.
during a workout. So if I'm doing a 2 hour run and I've only done 30-minute runs, I may think my form is pristine, like textbook. But after 90 minutes, it's necessarily going to start to falter. And so what I think I'm doing in my head is not what I'm actually doing with my body. Eric pointed this out to me one time when, again, years ago, we were on bookstore together for Natural Born Heroes. And so we're doing these running, we would show up at like Asheville, North Carolina or Washington, D.C., and we would meet at the bookstore. And whoever was coming for the event, we'd all do like a group fun run together. And when we have 200 or 300 people, just do like a 2 mile run, 3 mile run, and then go right back into the bookstore and then talk about that experience and then extrapolate it into Born to Run. But after a couple of weeks of these events, I got this like nagging, like groin tear. And Eric goes, "What's happening is you're getting tired and you're dragging your leg. You think you're popping that leg up, but you're not." And my leg, if you cut it off and you put it on like a fish scale, my leg probably weighs like 70 pounds. That's 70 pounds of dead weight pulling against one ligament,
Mm.
just below my hip. And he's like, that's the problem. You're getting tired. You're not moving the leg as fast as you think you are, and it's putting a torque on your groin. So you just move your leg faster, and the pain will go away. So it was things like that, and that's another big problem is we are disconnected from interpretation of body diagnostics. We don't understand what pain means, A, and then B, we are also not really in tune with our body movements. So if you think you have perfect running form, are you able, are you in good enough communication with the parts of your body to actually be able to test that without
Hmm.
like trying to videotape it on your phone, which creates another variable which throws it off.
Yeah.
So little things like that become complications.
Absolutely. I've experienced similar things in myself, and it is a real challenge to get past that because we're raised to dissociate from our body. I mean, like it's part of our culture. And so coming back into it and then exercising in your body, like instead of like letting your brain just be on another planet, but like you're moving your body and you're here, like you're mentally here. That is hard to do. And a lot of people, they're trying to be as far away from their body while they're exercising as possible. So that's been an interesting journey that I've been on myself through this whole thing is I want to be able to just go out and do whatever I want, but then I would get injured or whatever, I'm in pain, I'm did something that gave me some negative feedback. And because I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. And so I think that is a really important piece of the whole movement is it's a mental thing as well.
Oh man, there's an hour conversation right there. Um, there are two things which come to mind. Actually, three. I'm afraid I'm going to forget one of them, but I want to tell you really quick before I forget. So there's a woman named T. Lynn Carpenter on Instagram. She's a parkour specialist, and you talk about body awareness. Check out her videos. I watch her and think this woman is the perfect like Top Gun pilot of her own body. Like she has got the controls so dialed in, and it wasn't like an accident. She wasn't born that way. She spent a lifetime understanding exactly how to balance, move, and then
Mhm.
she'll do like stunts that she'll flop, and she'll
Mm.
like kind of get up with a laugh, and she realized, okay, I did this wrong. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, I have two thoughts which are on my mind a lot. One is if I'm on a run and I start thinking negative shit about people, if I'm like having an argument with somebody in my brain, I guarantee I'll fall on my ass. Because
Mm.
I'm running a trail, I'm like, I'm really pissed at what that guy said. You know what? I should have told him, and boom, down I go. And I think about this a lot. It's like not necessarily just because I am distracted. Like there's that saying, you are where your feet are. Like, be where your feet are. So be in the present to the point of like, be exactly where you are with your feet contacting the ground. Don't think about anything that is not where your feet are at that moment. But I think it's beyond that too. I think a negative thought, a malicious thought, I think it causes tension. It changes. I think you tense up for battle or something. But I guarantee, if I am, it is such like a moral reprimand for me. If I'm thinking negative shit and I'm being evil in my brain, I'm going to catch my toe on a rock. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I can almost clock it when it's going to happen. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I saw a blog post by some kind of like a holistic mover runner woman in the UK, and she goes, "I can't prove it. I don't know why it happens this way, but if I have an injury or a pain on one side of my body, I just imagine it's on the other side and it goes away." Have you ever heard this?
So Stephen Sashin from Zero Shoes, he has the
Of
theory
course.
similar where but it's a little bit kind of the flip-flop of that, where if you have a pain on one side, then you focus on the good side, I think is what it is. Like something about like trying to get your other side to do what you're like flip what your body's doing so that your bad side is doing what your good side is doing. You'll have to ask him for corroboration on that. But it's the same kind of a mental thing where you're just like shaking things up.
So yeah, I would imagine the result is the same thing. So if your left foot is sore while you're running, well, imagine it's actually your right foot that's sore. And what will happen is you will start to compensate for the right foot by putting more emphasis on the left foot, which is actually the sore foot. I don't know how it works, but it is bizarre. I kind of tested it out. It's like, it's kind of works. If like my left Achilles is a little tight, well, I imagine my right Achilles is tight. And next, before I know it, the left Achilles. So what probably happens is, yeah, you're causing some kind of imbalance. You're changing your gait because of this feedback, and that by imagining it's the other way around, you then re-equalize things. So,
By
go ahead.
by focusing on the pain, you can make it worse because you start moving differently and
Yeah.
move with a poor gait, and then that can even aggravate it. So yeah.
Can I flip this a little bit? I'm intensely curious to hear about your hypermobility journey. Do you mind
Sure.
telling me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean it's genetic, right? So I mean you can have hypermobility that's acquired, and a lot of people do because they get an injury or they like repetitive motion, and then they get certain joints that are really loose and want to like pop out and get injured easily. But I seem to have, because of I have a family line that has the same thing, where it's all the collagen in my body is lax, and like my skin tears really easily, and I have some other weird things like that. So my joints are just super mobile. Like I can do all the yoga things, and I would injure myself doing just these stupid little things like picking up a 10-pound weight, and I'd sprain my wrist, and I sprained my ankle and it like never healed. And I dislocated my jaw eating granola. I kind of like these weird things that were racking up as I was going through life. And then they were not healing. And like then like I dislocated my jaw eating granola, and it would pop out every time I take a bite out of an apple. I
Mm,
couldn't.
mm.
And it really wasn't until I got into this idea of the thinking about alignment and foot health from the ground up and having the strength and stability, that I also heard people talking about how that related to joint stability, and how if you have instability throughout all your joints, then you're going to have like all kinds of wacky alignment issues. And also your shoes are going to be extra important, because if if my joints are easily sort of pushed around, then having shoes that are narrow or heeled can affect me maybe a little more than someone else who doesn't have such unstable joints. So I've had to be really mindful about, one, being in tune with my joints, because I can like be hyperextended and not realize it. and injure myself because it doesn't feel like it's pain in the moment. But then later it's like, oh yeah, you had your joint like way out of alignment while you were exercising and now it's all swollen. So I've had to approach things a little differently than other people. I mean, it is not so uncommon. So it's not like I'm just like this outlier. It is relatively common, but having to just be a little bit slower in my adaptation, like if I'm picking up a new exercise or a new activity, I have to be paying attention and I have to really focus on the strengthening of the around each joint. But it's not as limit. I mean, it can be very limiting, but if you really focus on the strengthening and the stability, you really can, I really can do a lot of things. But I do just have to be a little bit more careful, maybe with impact and stuff like that.
So it must have been, was it like a light bulb moment for you when you suddenly realized there was a common cause of all these things that were vexing you?
Yes, it definitely was because I would go into the doctor with all this joint pain and these chronic injuries, and they're like, well, you're not overweight. And so we're not really sure why you have joint pain. And I'm like, is that all that you can do for me is take my weight? I mean, like, like I'm in pain and nobody could tell me anything. And
Yeah.
so having those dots connected was huge because it gave me something I could do about it. So physical therapy has been really important for me over the last 5 years. You know, like spot treating is how I think of it. You know, I've got like I can point to all the joints in my body that they're extra loose and I just have to put a little extra attention to them. And so my physical therapist and I, we go through the joints and we do targeted exercise. So I've been doing jaw exercises for years. I got a wonky shoulder and I just try and take extra care with each of these things. And that's how I approach it. So it was really life-changing for me to
So
start.
what was that's I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just to hear people talk about it. And it's a lot bigger part of the conversation nowadays.
But it's funny because on the one hand, you're saying it's not that uncommon, and yet you were seeing all these doctors like, I don't know,
Yeah.
you're skinny, you should be all right.
Well, 25% of people is not uncommon. But when you're talking about common practice, like standard of care, if it serves 75% of people, then they don't even think about the other 25%. So that is something that I have had that I think that this is a very common experience where you are in that 30, 20% that isn't fitting into the mold and nobody's talking about what is going on with you and nobody has any answers for you, and whether it's hypermobility or it's like the shoe thing or your foot injury or your running injury, you go to a specialist and they talk to you as if this is the only possible thing that could be wrong, but it doesn't apply to you. I think that that happens to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I really encourage you to connect with Christina Canizares is her name. Her on Instagram, she's fit and bendy. We met Christina because she is all about minimalist shoes, and her journey sounds very similar to yours. She was a dancer growing up and a gymnast. So on the one hand, she was able to perform lots of gymnastic stunts. On the other hand, she's always getting injured, and doctors are like, "Oh, I guess you're just too weak, and you should lift more weights." And she tried to lift weights, and it would make things worse and worse. And the phrase hypermobility was very late revelation to her. And then once it was, she set about creating an exercise program for herself, which she now extends to other people. There's a very super famous pop star who I can't name because I was told in confidence, but Christina works with her all the time because she struggles with this. And she ran the same thing. There wasn't this is a person who has access to anybody in the world, but there were no doctors who were actually giving her help. And she ended up with a former burlesque dancer gymnast who actually is specializing. And so
Yeah.
I think this idea is that the person with the white coat and all the letters behind their name is the expert, but someone like you or Barefoot Ted or Christina are just kind of, eccentrics It's really wrong. You've actually had to become an expert. You're like Tom Hanks on the island. You had to become an expert in sailing, otherwise you're not getting off the island. In some ways, you know more than anybody else.
I think that the amount of information that a doctor is supposed to know is too much. It's like they have to be able to
Yeah.
perform surgery, then they have to recognize all these diseases, and it's like it's almost like it needs to be its own field. There should be more options. There should be foot specialists who do rehab. Like there should be physical therapists who specialize in foot and ankle rehab. I mean, they call them sports therapists, but people who aren't into sports need access to this. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like the medical system has so much that needs to happen because people who come with issues, so many of them they just fall through the cracks. It's like you can get treated for an infection, but you can't figure out what to do about your creaky knee that hurts every day and clicks and pops. So I don't know. I don't know what the long-term solution is, but I hope that as people like your friend Christina and you and I and these other, Irene Davis, and we've got Courtney Conley from Gate Happens, these people who are trying to spread the word and trying to reach people and reach patients as much as possible to help them. I just hope that it continues to grow so that it becomes more of an option. Like you have a foot pain, you have a foot issue, you have a running issue, you can go the natural rehab route. That's what I
Let's
hope
let's
in the future.
let's have a moment of appreciation for doctors because you did open my eyes to something that's easy to overlook. You're in urgent care, and every 10 minutes, someone's coming in with something weird. I got stung by a scorpion. I'm not kidding. This actually happened to me. I got stung by a scorpion, but I didn't know it was a scorpion. This was on the big island of Hawaii. We were camping out, and I went to get some firewood barefoot, and something jabbed in my foot. I thought it was a splinter, maybe a centipede. So then in urgent care, and underneath like my toe and like the crease between like my foot and my toe, which is all kind of bent over like this, there's some kind of little mark. So now you're an urgent care guy. So barefoot guy comes in, he doesn't even know what happened to him, and now he's got to diagnose it. So imagine how big your brain's got to be, full of knowledge to go, okay, yeah, this actually looks like a scorpion bite. Okay, here's the stinger. Here's the antibiotic you need. Here's the treatment you need. Here's the aftercare you need. And then I walk out, and the next person walks in who might have like tennis elbow. So yeah, you're right. It is an unbelievable amount of generalization that these miracle workers have to have. That said, I like to believe, that as human animals, everything begins and ends with movement. We are alive when we start to move, and we are dead when we stop moving. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe if there were a real rehabilitative um, specialty or generalization, it was based on movement.
Mm-hmm.
When you come through the door, how are you moving? What's stopping you from moving? Oh, is it pain? Is it a wonky ankle? If we can approach that part of medicine, not the catastrophic medicine of the idiot with the scorpion bite, but the more everyday present problem, your problem, my problem actually are the same problem. We,
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't move without difficulty, and a movement specialist could have addressed that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that people think of physical therapy as a grudge move. It's like nobody wants to go out of their way and like do stuff like that. And of course it is a mixed bag. Not all physical therapists are great, but that's the closest thing to it, I feel like, unless you have some kind of a movement worker who's local to you who is good at that, or a trainer. But it's so hard to get yourself to that point where you're willing to invest in that in yourself. But it really can be so valuable for your whole life because it is life. I mean, like being able to move and to get around, and this is a really important thing. So figuring those little nagging things out, like don't wait 10, 15 years because when your ankle hurts every day, like see what you can do about it now so that you can 15 years from now, you're still running. Um,
Because nothing makes you feel worse than physical pain. I had the flu last week, and I was making end of life plans. I'll tell my wife, listen, you know where life insurance is. I had the flu, and for 2 days I was achy. But to me, this is the worst thing that ever happened to anybody. And for you too, your hypermobility caused some emotional stress, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I also had recently had a baby, and just not being able to feel like I could care for them was really hard. And then of course you're always in pain. I mean, just being in pain all the time is it's a really big mental challenge. And a lot of people are in pain a lot. I think that's partly why these messages resonate so strongly, is because people are trying to find solutions. But
And that's one I think crucial. I'm sorry, I feel like I cut you off there.
no, you're good.
I think that's one crucial connection that a lot of people don't make, which is that I wonder how much of mental health can be associated with physical discomfort.
Mm.
And I think we tend to look at them as separate things. Someone has clinical depression, true, but how much of it is either spurred or exacerbated by physical discomfort?
Mhm.
Those 2 days I had the flu, I was distraught. I'm lying in bed, I'm uncomfortable. And to me, it's never going to end. Even though, logic brain's like, dude, you're going to be fine in a day. Gatorade and chicken soup and you're good. But to me, there was no end in sight of this pain. Well, imagine if you did have lingering pain. Like in your case, it must have gone on for what, months or years?
Years, yeah. I was in really bad shape with my foot for about a year and a half, maybe close to 2 years. So yeah, I mean, it was really discouraging. And I think that when you've lived something, and you also lived your experience with your marathon and in Mexico and all of that, it's just so valuable to be able to say, okay, I've been on both sides of this and I've been down that road and here's what I learned from it. But yeah, being in pain constantly, it really sucks.
Isn't it crazy? So you think if your physical situation had been addressed earlier, it would have saved you from the mental stress that you went through?
I can't say for certain because things happen. People get injured or I know a lot more now, but I still might slip up and make bad choices and not take care of my body for 6 months and then end up in a bad spot again. So, I can't say that I could have avoided it completely. And maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I needed to learn some of those lessons. But when I was a kid, I was presenting with unusual injuries and I never got physical therapy. I never learned to strengthen. I never learned to move better. I never had anybody talk to me about what could be causing this. So it makes sense to me that 20 years after I started having foot issues for no apparent reason, that it would kind of all come to a head. So at 20 years ago, nobody was talking about hypermobility and nobody was talking about foot rehab. So a 9-year-old is not going to get a foot strengthening exercise when foot strengthening exercise program when she comes in with a swollen ankle tendonitis. But I can do that with my kids now. When my son, who's also hypermobile, has an issue with he has sprained his ankle, just running around because he's lax. And I took him to the physical therapist and I have this little ankle rocker board and so I do hope, I mean, we'll see. This is the experiment. We'll have him come back here in 30 years and see if it made a difference. But I do think that, I mean, these things matter. The little things that you do over years, they really make a difference. I mean, you've been running injury free for this long and you were always having injuries before. I mean, the little behaviors that we do, they make a difference in how we feel. So we'll hope that my son doesn't end up with the same issues later down the road.
I am dying to fast forward ahead 30 years to have your son gone. Oh, hang on a second.
Yeah.
It's a crazy busy morning for me. There's like body surfers are coming out here and looking for me to go out in the water with them, and my daughter's checking in. Usually, my entire week is like appointment free. But they're coming from all sides today. Yeah, I would love to see that conversation 30 years from now. Like, My crazy mom, man, she made me go to school in these wacky ass shoes, like the big wide toe box, and,
You know,
or else.
my
Go ahead.
I was gonna say my son, this same child, he loves barefoot shoes and he will not wear anything else. He wears one pair of Vivo Barefoot Primus every single day for a year until they're like completely blown through. And he tells other people about him. So he's my little convert because he can't stand it. Like they go barefoot as much as possible. They just can't stand anything messing with their feet. So I'm like, okay, at least we've got that going.
Yeah, it's actually the same with my kids. So my kids grew up. So we lived on a farm for 20 years in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, um, and our Amish neighbors are usually barefoot. The second it's warm enough, they're barefoot all summer long. And if they are wearing shoes, it is some very wide, usually hand-me-down work boot. So shoes are always wide, unrestraining, and minimal. You wouldn't be up on a stack. You don't want a lot of cushion. Why would you wear cushion, riding a horse or walking through a field? So our kids grew up seeing that, and then they were out with me. So we never actually had the conversation. I never told my kids, wear a minimalist shoe, and here's why. Because during the whole Born to Run thing, they were like 7 or 8 years old, and they just kind of adopted whatever was around or what they saw as being normal. And now, if I take my kids out to buy running shoes, they just reject this on appearance. They'll just toss stuff aside. If it's got a high heel stack, they don't even look at it. And if
Yeah.
it's got a narrow toe, they kind of recoil from it, which is
Right.
a conversation we never even had to have. It's just what grew up being used to.
Yeah, that's great. So one question I wanted to ask you before we finish up here is
Yeah.
going back to the shoes. What would you say is I know it might be hard to say the most important, but what is more important, the shoes or the running technique? Like if you only were to do one thing, what would you change? Or how do they work together?
Okay. I thought I was going to be flummoxed there, but I actually had the right answer. The right answer is the form, because the form will then dictate the footwear. So if you've got good form for any kind of a movement, you've probably seen those like videos of like expert tennis players who will play with like a trash can lid, or a
Mm,
guy who plays ping pong using a flip flop. If you're really good at your craft, you can get away with all kinds of impediments and obstacles.
mhm,
My coach Eric Gorton runs a lot of very jagged, rocky mountain trails in the Tetons, and he likes to have more cushion beneath his foot. He still does a zero drop shoe, but he likes to have a little bit more stack height. So it's still zero drop, but he wants a little bit more cushion. Um, but he's also a master technician.
mhm.
I'm not. I am a guy who's learning running form, and it's very present in my mind because if I get slack, then all of a sudden, oh, I got the groin pull or I got the calf pull. Why? Because I became sloppy without being aware I was sloppy. Eric is never sloppy. And so for me, I can only wear a minimal shoe because if I start to wear anything that is more cushioned or motion inhibitive, my form goes off and I'm aware of it going off. So for Born to Run 2, Eric and I had this great Titanic battle, which is actually included in the book because I said, okay, it's time for us to stop being agnostics. I have vehemently refused to recommend shoes to people for years. I'm not going to get into that battle. It's not my place. I don't want to be in a screaming argument with Beaver and Bear, Five Fingers versus Ultra versus. And I'm not going to bother. Do your own research, pick your own shoe. But for Born to Run 2, I'm like, dude, we got to come off the fence. We got to tell people what shoe to get. And Eric's like, they should get the Ultra Escalante Racer. Like that is the perfect transitional shoe, running shoe. And I'm like, dude, no way. It's too much shoe. There's too much shoe. And so we make the recommendation, and then right underneath it, in parentheses, I go, but I completely disagree with this. Even though we're recommending it, I disagree with our recommendation. I really believe it should be zero shoes. It should be the zero shoes Mesa Trail or the Allen, blah, blah, blah. But to me, that perfectly encapsulates, I think, the honesty of the approach that Eric and I have, which is this is an argument we're willing to have in public. And it is that point of what exactly you're looking for. Um, if you are so confident in your form that you feel you can enjoy a little more cushioning, then go with the Escalante. If
Mhm.
you're like me and most people, where you're still like, I'm like 100% about my form, I want I want to feel a rock jabbing in the foot because it's reminding me, hey, dude, get up on your forefoot, shorten your stride, be lighter. Like that little jab of rock is a reminder to tighten things up.
Yeah, I've kind of similar in my approach where for me that proprioception that you get from the barefoot feel is really important. And that's why I think the barefoot walking and actually barefoot running, actually just trying it out, even if it's not for very long, that can be so impactful because of the form issue. But I personally incorporate both kind of depending on the day or like when I reach my threshold, then I'll switch from the ultra minimalist shoe to the more cushioned shoe, which you can do with the going barefoot too. You walk barefoot until you're not comfortable anymore or you feel like, you need to stop, then you throw on shoes and that's okay. But you're still experiencing it. I think that that's a good way to go about it. But definitely that cushion, I mean, that can really mess up your form if you're not careful. And so I agree with you on that point. But I do think that for some people who it's too hard for them mentally to pare down their distances to match what they can do in a minimalist shoe. They're used to having this big, heavy cushion shoe and being able to run and not feel it. And then they want to do the same distance in the minimalist shoe immediately. And that is not necessarily a good idea. That sometimes that managing yourself is hard for people. And if you can't, and you have to just keep running that same amount of time, then I would say sometimes use the ultra minimalist shoe and then maybe an ultra for the second half or something like that. So there's a lot of ways to go about it, but it's
I think
you
my
oh,
wife came up with a genius technique. It's one of those things of like, oh, it's so smart. It's so obvious. Why didn't I think of this? What she'll do is she'll take her shoes and she'll start running barefoot, carry her shoes in her hand. And as soon as she experiences any discomfort, her feet get a little bit raw, whatever, she just puts the shoes on and then keeps on running. Like that's it. So if she's going to go a 5 mile run, the first quarter mile might be barefoot, or the first half mile or mile, whenever she feels, yeah, I think it's time to put the shoes on. So there she's getting the miles. But Anya, here's to me is like the key fundamental thing which people struggle with, which is that we only have a certain amount of minutes in our day to get our exercise. We have 45 minutes. So we're concerned about our weight, we're concerned about our cardiovascular fitness, we're concerned about this race we're training for. You got to deal with that in 45 minutes. And so it is a lot to ask people to say, okay, you know what? You're now going to learn this craft. You're going to learn this fine art, and you have to start slowly and focus on the execution and not worry about the outcome. People are like, dude, I just had spaghetti for lunch. I got 45 minutes to burn it off. I'm not going to mess around with your little drills. I'm going to go out and run as hard as I can on the treadmill for 45 minutes. But that's why. So our approach with Born to Run too is, we consider it a running reboot. It's a 3 month approach to pick that moment in your life. Okay, like, hey, I just finished a marathon. I'm going to be resting for a while anyway. There's your 3 month window to reboot everything: your form, your footwear, your overall fitness and mobility, and then gradually ramp up with all those things in harmony, as opposed to like, well, my eating is one thing, my shoes are another thing, my training is another thing, my overall fitness is another thing. We sort of look at them as separate.
mm-hmm.
Your shoes, people think your shoes aren't really connected with your form. What you're eating is not really connected with how you're training. And we're saying the opposite. They all need to be synced together. And when they are, hey, you're good to go. I talk about like with people like learning a musical instrument. You can pick up a guitar and just strum like a maniac and have a lot of fun. That's fun, but you're not playing a song. You're just strumming like a maniac.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take the time to learn the chords, learn the fingering, learn the progressions, after the end of 3 months, you're way more of a musician than you were if you just went like that every day.
Yeah. And this is really like, that's like a really good summary of my efforts as well, is trying to get people to think of it as a package, that you can't just buy a pair of shoes and then everything is going to get fixed. And that is this key to the long-term success, is all of it combined, and that it doesn't happen immediately overnight, but you have to be invested in yourself and in your body. And that's one of the challenges today, is people want to just take the shoes and run with it and then never look back, and all their problems are solved. Getting them to sort of stop and listen for a little bit and learn and think of a new way of going about it. But yeah, so I feel you on
But
that one.
here's the thing, though. I am that person. I'm Mr. ADD, ADHD, and Eric is very reason and control and patient, and yet I am the thing he has to deal with. So it's been a great partnership because, like for Born to Run 2, Eric had a bunch of mobility exercises, and we're going to include in the book. And he sent me like 30 exercises. I'm like, dude, I would never do 30 exercises. There's no way. You better make it 5. And then he sent me 5. I'm like, it's still too many. Give me 3. But I'm the guy, like, dude, I'm telling you honestly in your face, I will never do this shit. And we can't put it in the book. If I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to ask anybody else to do it. And so the kind of exercises he pared it down to are like, all right, what kind of stuff can we reasonably expect a hyper active dude like McDougall actually do? And one of them is balancing on one foot.
Mm.
And I love it. So there's only 3 exercises, strengthening exercises in the book. One of them is balancing on one foot. You take your shoes off and you balance on one foot and you hover the other foot off the ground.
Yeah.
And I do it all the time. I do it. Do you do that?
Oh yeah, I'm single leg balance. I mean, like all the variations of it. Golden Harper always talks about doing the single leg balance with your heel up. How long you
Yeah.
can do that is super great. So yeah, single leg balance is like gold for walking and running.
It's gold, and you do it. I do it now. I do it compulsively. If I'm in a post op, even if I'm wearing shoes, I'm waiting in line. I'm just bouncing my foot, I'm wobbling around a little bit. If I'm making coffee, I do it all the time. The point, I'm not even aware I'm doing it anymore. Things like that, or a flat footed deep squat where you just keep your feet flat on the ground, your legs wide, and you drop into a deep squat. Like you were in India waiting for a bus. That kind of a posture is very common in non-sitting cultures, and just hang out there. To me, that again, it's the ibuprofen of movements. It just kind of solved everything. So Eric's idea is simplify them, universalize them, because the key is you have to get people to connect what they're doing with how they're feeling, and that's the big disconnect. So if we tell people, "Oh, you should, you should, you should," like, I don't know what that means. Like, how is it supposed to feel? And so if you can balance on one foot, now you know what foot strength feels like. Now
Mhm.
you know what balance feels like, because there's so much wrapped into that thing. Like, you can't balance on your foot if your posture's off. You can't balance on your one foot if you're not aware of where your shoulders are and how your head is sitting on your neck. Your
Mhm.
neck, yeah, your head sitting on your neck. I don't need to sit there and coach you through it. If you balance on one foot, you're going to coach yourself through 15 different movement adjustments. Here's
Mhm.
the thing that I think we came up with, that to me is sort of the golden rule for running, is we call it, the rock lobster. And the rock lobster is: take off your shoes, put the song Rock Lobster on your phone, and then stand with your back to a wall. And then just run in place, barefoot, to the rhythm of Rock Lobster. And Rock Lobster is like 90 beats per minute. So it's 180 running strides per minute.
Mhm.
And that is that quick pitter patter bouncing movement cadence will stop you from spending too much time on one foot or the other. And by being on one foot too long, that creates a torque when you're running. And that's it. So if you just run barefoot in place to the tune of Rock Lobster, I don't need to sit there and videotape you and coach you and tell you, do this, do this, do this. Your body will tell you, like, oh, okay, I get it. This is the cadence. Because you can't land on your heel if you're running in place. It just doesn't work. So all these things are very simple movement that then gives your body a sense of how it should feel, and then you can take that out into the world.
Yeah, it's like it's both simple, and we overthink things, but also it does take intention. Like you have to actually invest in it and do it. And that's a yeah. I did the
But
rock
it's but,
lobster.
but it's okay. All right.
Yeah,
And
I read Born to Run 2 like almost immediately after it came out, and I have this video of me up against the wall, and my kids are like throwing pillows at me as I'm trying to do rock lobster.
what did you think?
It was good. I mean, I've been practicing natural running form for a while. So I think I mostly had it before then, but I was impressed with how easy it was to fall into it using that cue, that it's really simple, but also you really can't do you can't overstride, you can't run on your heels when you're doing that. So it's a really good, and also it's stamina. It helps you assess, okay, what's my stamina with this? Because if I can't keep this up at this pace, then I need to be, maybe I need to be working on my endurance or so it's a good distilled exercise.
I think it's also good too because you mentioned stamina, and a lot of people will message me and say, "Hey, I'm doing a rock lobster, but I'm running out of gas before 3 minutes is up, before the song's over." And my answer to them is do less, not meaning run less, but do less with your body. Because I think when people are changing form, they become so self conscious. They're trying to do everything just right. So if we say drive with their knee, they think their knee is like a high knee drill. So they're
Mm.
bringing their knee up to their nipples, and they're moving their arms and they become rigid and robotic. And I just say, relax, do less. You just got to get your foot off the ground. If it's a half an inch, that's good enough. Just relax, do the minimum, which I think is the secret to good movement in the first place, is relax and do the least amount that your body has to in order to execute the motion you want.
Yeah, the advocates of the slow running, like Phil Maffetone, then there's the chi running. It's the same cadence, but you're not pushing off as hard, so you're just not moving as far and your feet aren't coming up as far off the ground. So your heart rate's a lot lower, but it's still that form, it's still that cadence, the 180 beats per minute. You're just not moving as fast.
Yeah, yeah. And then over time, you will move faster because you can then lengthen that stride out because of the fact that now your heart rate is down, your form is dialed in. So that's basically all speed is. Speed is just lengthening.
Hmm.
Putting that leg up, you're still whipping it around. But um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, so when you got into natural running, who was your guide back then?
Oh, well, I didn't have a guide. I just, I mean,
Yeah.
I've been in this world for long enough, and I'm friends with Courtney Conley, and I read all the books, and so I just asked questions to people when I needed to, and figured it out on my own. So didn't really have a
That's
coach,
basically
but
why we. That's basically why. Go ahead.
I was gonna say your Born to Run 2 was the first kind of cohesive, all-encompassing book that kind of covered all of it for me.
My favorite sentences from Born to Run Two is your fork is not your coach. And so basically, we wrote the book for people like you, the people who are out there. They want to do just something different, but there isn't there isn't any kind of good coaching system that actually challenges what the conventional running world has been saying forever. But that said, there is like chi running. There were running form teachers, but I felt like nobody was taking this whole message that running should be natural to your life and every aspect of your life. And we tend to segment it out. Well, running is the thing I do after work before I go home and take care of the kids. Running is the thing I do Saturday morning to train for this race. It's a separate thing. And what we're trying to say is if humans evolve as running animals, then that activity was woven to every aspect of their lives. And the way you eat is going to affect the way you run. The way you run is going to affect the way you eat. Your all around body mobility, your overall strength, all of it, your understanding of cadence and rhythm and pace, they're all tied in together. And you can't just say, "Well, I'm going to change my running form. I'm good to go."
Hmm.
You can't. You have to actually understand how you eat because that's the big part of the problem is the overwhelming majority of people run because of their relationship with food. one way or the other. Either they're trying to lose weight or they don't want to gain weight or all that kind of stuff. And the problem then is then running becomes a punishment or a counteractive to the other aspect. And so we need to bring those two things together.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good point. Well, I don't want
Well,
to take up too much of your time, Chris. So thank you so much for joining me. And is there anything you want to leave my
we
readers?
had we had a deal on you.
Oh, this interview is over, Chris. I can't listen.
That's right. I wanted to sign up. You know what, dude? Enough of you. Um, no, I think the only thing I would like to do is just let people know that there are these amazing thinkers and educators out there that I learn about every day. Again, I thought I was like in the middle of this, universe, and I'm like, man, there's people I never heard of. So Kelly Starrett, are you familiar with Kelly Starrett?
We've talked about him before.
Kelly Starrett is a physical therapist. You can find his videos on YouTube. He's got little phrases like, ice is for corpses. If you get an injury, don't ice it and rest it, move it. Kelly Starrett's advice specifically to injuries and ailments, I find is super fresh and unorthodox and really useful. So I would point people toward Kelly Starrett's Golden Harper. Anything he has to say is always perfect. Uh, Christina Fit and Bendy on Instagram for people dealing with hypermobility or other issues. There are, again, a lot of super smart people out there on social media that can open up our eyes and perspectives that can be practical and we can employ right away.
And of course, Born to Run, which is more story form, narrative, and then Born to Run 2, which is more practical steps to actually improve your running.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks a lot, Anya. This was so fun. When you and I had our first conversation, I'm like, we could go for 2 hours, no problem. And we're getting kind of close already. So I really enjoy talking to you. You bring a lot of smarts and eloquence to the conversation.
Thank you. Well, and thank you for writing the book Born to Run so that we could even be here in the first place.
Can I get a big thumbs up?
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. We'll see you later.
All right, Anya, thanks a lot.